Welcome everybody back to Sustainable River Basin Management Module 3.1, Part 5. In this last part of Part 1 of Module 3, I want to talk about water governance. Let's look into the context of this. We are talking about sustainable water management, and this means that we have to look into understanding water resources, water budgets, and the limitations on abstractions. But we also have to look into good governance, and this is what we will be focusing on now. Good governance indicators, those are used to measure governance and compare the practices of one region with practices in another region. And what indicators are: participation, transparency, equity, the effectiveness and efficiency, the rule of law, the accountability, the coherency, responsiveness, integration, and ethical values. We will be going into some of those in detail, and we will touch upon many of those at later parts of our course. Now, let's just define water governance. Water governance refers to a political, social, economic, and administrative system which is in place for water resources management on one hand side, and it also refers to the delivery of water services. Now, keep in mind that governance draws from its social approval of its practices, and it doesn't come automatic. It builds on the reiteration of trust-building processes. So governance, also water governance, just on its own will fail if these 2 points are not met. What are the challenges in the water governance? Very often we see competing interests at various levels of government and state sectors, which efficiently inhibit river basin management. So there may all the institutions be in place, but the interests are not coming together. Also, we see water development authorities or legal mechanisms very often appealing to engineers, which on the other side entrench authorities or also politicians in the hands of large hydraulic bureaucracies. And what the outcome very often is so-called white elephant projects. You may have a few in mind when you hear or read this for yourself. Very often politicians are made believe that with a large engineering solution, a large-scale engineering solution, we can actually solve a number of problems just in one step, and without actually understanding the scale and the range of impacts associated with such large projects. Another challenge in water governance is that we want to and we require stakeholder participation, but the number of organizations and stakeholders getting involved with water management in river basin increase as our basin stress increases. And we will come back to this at a later stage again when we talk about water allocation. But this is a matter of fact which puts participation onto a very pressurized agenda, ways and solutions of how to deal with the stakeholder participation are especially questioned under these conditions. And the final challenge on water governance is that the integrity and the accounting in water resources management receives the least attention. Although water projects involve huge capital costs, huge investments, a lot of money goes into these projects. The accounting and integrity very often lags very much behind the size of these projects. Now, water governance should address obviously a number of things, and I'm listing this in an order of priorities. So means first place is highest priority, second is sort of second level priority, and so on. And on the what would be the first important priority is that it should be good water governance. It should not be any type of governance, some system in place. It should be a good water governance. The second in this, quite interesting also, is that it should address securing water for ecosystems. This before the third comes, which is securing water for people. We have been talking about this before, and we will come back on this prioritization again along the course. The fourth in this is securing water for food, and then we come to fifth and so on, which is gender disparities. It should be able to manage risks. Such risks could be droughts, floods, these natural disasters. It could also be a pollution. It could be an upstream, downstream intervention. It should value water. It should make sure that water for industries and cities is available. In that case, we speak of ways of securing bulk water supply, and transboundary water issues should be addressed. So this is the order of priorities for good water governance. Now, moving into one very specific issue of water governance on securing water for people, we have to talk about basic water needs. And while talking about basic water needs, we automatically also are speaking about a human right. And I'm going to explain this now. The access to water is linked to sanitation. And by this link, it is linked to health and also linked to education. And through this chain of linkages, it's ultimately linking access to water to living quality. Now, just to remind us that more people die of the consequences of polluted water than of any violence, any disasters, or any wars going on our planet. Now, according to the World Health Organization, a person needs between 50 and 100 liters of water per day to ensure that the most basic needs are met and that only few health concerns potentially arise. So this is what is needed, what has been determined by this estimate of liters per person per day. Many countries have set their own minimum requirements, which could be very much below that or could be just above, like in the case of rural India, where this has been defined to 55 liters per day per person. Now, let's look into the linkage and try to understand that linkage between basic water needs and human rights. Access to safe drinking water is a precondition to enjoy the rights which are human rights and which are recognized and legally established worldwide. And those rights are, for instance, the right to education, the right to housing, right to health, right to life, right to work, and also the protection against cruel or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. So all of those are a precondition, require as a precondition access to safe drinking water. So, and for that reason, we link water provision to basic water needs to human rights. Let's look into the human rights aspect to water in the case of India, which probably is the most interesting to you. And what is important is to keep in mind that we are not confusing human right to water with the term water rights. And we have talked about water rights earlier, and also we'll come back to this later again. So both are two different things. And I'm quoting from this report here, the India Infrastructure Report of the year 2011, where the statement is, a summary is given on the human rights aspects of water. It states that the right to pollution-free water and the right of access to safe drinking water has been read as a part of right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So this means it's been interpreted in such a way that there is a basic right to pollution-free water, or in substitute of pollution-free water, there's a basic right to safe drinking water. However, there is a judicially evolved fundamental right to water. So it's a right that by its interpretation has evolved, but it's not explicitly incorporated under the Constitution of India. And this is quite interesting to note, because something like primary education has been explicitly incorporated into the institution as a right, as a part of a human right. So this puts the human right to water discussion on a case-by-case decision, and in some of the cases where public water services may be failing, it can actually not be specifically targeted, because it would be a failure of the state or government authority in itself. So that's an important part to keep in mind. And let's look at the right to water from a more, let's say, global perspective. You should get hold of more detail, more reports also from the UN Human Rights Division. There's a specific division on that, which also has elaborated papers on rights to water. And what has been worked out there is that there are three basic principles: the principle of the individual freedom, the entitlement, and the sufficiency and continuity. What is meant by those? With the individual freedom, we mean the protection against arbitrary and illegal disconnections, the prohibition of unlawful pollution of water resources, the non-discrimination in access to safe drinking water and sanitation. This especially on the basis of land ownership or housing status. The non-interference with access to existing water supplies, this especially to traditional water sources, and the ensuring that personal security is not threatened when we access water or sanitation outside the home. So this in many parts of the world is not automatically given, and governments are working on these components individually, and although they may not specifically be outlined and discussed as a right to water, they're actually part of it. Let's look into the entitlements. What is meant by this? We mean access to a minimum amount of safe drinking water to sustain life and health. We also mean access to safe drinking water and sanitation in detention. This is, remember, one of the human rights on this issue. the participation in water and sanitation related decision making at the national and also at community levels, and the access or availability of a water source within less than 1 kilometer from a home, and the collection time should not exceed 30 minutes. So this combines two things. One is the distance to the nearest water source. It could be a public, or it could be a tap, or a tank, or a kiosk, and also the collection time as such. So although distance and time may relate, there might be also a collection time associated with queuing, standing in a queue, wait for the water, wait for a tanker or lorry to arrive, wait for others to fill their containers before you, which all count under the collection time in itself, independent from the distance to the water source. And the third part on the right to water and principles, the sufficiency and continuity. Water supply for each person must be sufficient and continues to cover personal and domestic uses. This is very specific. What is basic need, personal and domestic uses. The water for personal and domestic uses must be safe and acceptable. Water and sanitation facilities must be physically accessible, and water services must be affordable to all. I've marked some of these terms: sufficient, acceptable, accessible, affordable. And you may be wondering already who actually defines this. How is this being set out, and who decides what is affordable, what is accessible, what is sufficient? And this requires a legislation, and it does not only require a legislation or a water legislation, it should be following a rights-based approach to water management. And what do we mean by a rights-based approach to water management? It's a framework, it's a conceptual framework for the process of human development. So this is important. It focuses on human development, on inclusion. It's normatively based on international human rights standards. Means that it's an orientation, and it uses the international standards. Also, I'm taking my examples, especially from these from international reference institutions, organizations, so that to show what the global perspective is, although country-wise, nation-wide, or on a regional base, other conditions may apply, and they may be more restricted, or they may be less developed, or there may be gaps in it. And for that reason, the general orientation is the international standards on these. And it's operationally directed towards promoting and protecting human rights. This means that it's not automatically in place, also not automatically enforceable, not at all. It's simply towards a promotion and towards a protection of human rights. Now, the principles for this rights-based approach to water management is to express linkages to these rights. For instance, the link from access of safe water to food security, to sanitation as an example. Another principle to this is access to information. Accountability, for instance, in terms of water allocation, how decisions are made on prioritizing water, who gets water at what time, what quantities, for what purposes, in what quality. There should be a mechanism to understand and communicate this. It is based on the empowerment, the participation of stakeholders, and non-discrimination and a special attention to vulnerable groups. Now, the suggestions that I have for you to take home from this module are as follows. You should think about questions that probably have come up to you already, which I'm not readily answering to you because I want you to read more about this. For instance, a question could be, shall drinking water be provided free of charge now? After all the things that I've been talking about, is that the consequence of it? How about water for livestock or for subsistence farming? If, for instance, a person's or household's food security depends all on it. How does it play into these basic water needs and the human rights issues related to this? Who actually defines what is acceptable in terms of water quality and quantity? And you may have more questions, and I strongly suggest you to get into the literature and read more about this to get a clearer understanding of the water governance and especially the basic water needs discussion. Thank you for your attention, and I see you next time again.